Welcome to the Economics Clinic for A-Level, your number one page for all your economics needs as a student. Today we are going to look at a general introduction to economics part 1. And please expect to take a different twist as we shall explore a number of concepts which your teacher never taught you and yet you must know them as a student. Teacher Kiria Aaron is your host and please stick around. So let us take a quick look at what we are going to cover in this particular video presentation. So we shall actually start by looking at the origin of economics, and secondly we shall look at the contributions of Greek philosophers that shaped economics today, and lastly we shall look at how economics has evolved over the years. So let's start by looking at the origin of economics. You know the world presents different stories of origin, like there is the origin of man, and you know about the origin of the universe on the earth. And I guess you need to know about the origin of coronavirus, right? So economics also as a subject has got its own interesting story of origin. And we can never understand the origin of economics without putting ancient Greece into perspective. Now, you remember around the 5th century, history records that Athens, which is Greece's capital, was the world's most powerful and developed city. And one of the major contributing factors towards this phenomenon was simply because of the ancient Greek civilization, called the Renaissance or birth of knowledge, where Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle started asking the most important questions of life in major fields such as metaphysics, logic, poetics, politics, and natural science. They started coming up with solutions and answers to such questions through the power of critical thinking, which is the foundation of philosophy. And when such intellectual power and curiosity reached on the subject of economics, the Greek philosophers came up with two major Greek words. The first one was oikos, which means the basic unit of a society. Call it a household, a family, or a home. And the second Greek word was nomos, which means manager. And when the two Greek words are merged together, they came up with oikonomikos. And therefore, the modern word economics is actually derived from a Greek word oikonomikos, which literally means the management of a household or a family. At this point, it's imperative to note that economics as a discipline was first studied in ancient Greece by a number of philosophers who discovered concepts which have been polished and some developed into model theories and principles that we use today. So let us take a quick look at some of the major Greek philosophers that actually contributed to the shape of economics today. We shall say the first one is none other than Hesiod. Now, Hesiod is known to be the father of didactic poetry, and in one of his most famous accomplishments, which was entitled Works and Days, published around 700 BC, Hesiod highlighted three major concepts which continue to be relevant to us today. Hesiod was the first Greek philosopher to talk about the problem of scarcity of resource availability. Now, in economics, when we talk about scarcity, we are simply referring to the limited supply of resources needed in the production of goods and services that satisfy our needs. Now, we also need to understand what resources are. When we talk about resources in economics, we refer to them as factors of production, which means those factor inputs which are needed in the production of goods and services. Now, basically, we have four factors of production. That's land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. Now, at this point, we just need to understand how did this concept of history of problem of scarcity shape the modern economics today. Now, we very well know that in modern economics, when we talk about economics, every individual society is faced by three major fundamental economic problems. And the first fundamental economic problem is actually scarcity, which is this original idea. So because of scarcity, every individual person or society is forced to make a choice. Now, when we talk about choice in economics, we are simply looking at making the right decision among the available alternatives at the right time. Now, how do we make the right decision anyway? When we talk about making the right decision in economics, we think about coming up with what we call the scale of preference, which is simply a list of wants ranging from the most important to the least important. So that means that you'll get all your unlimited needs and wants, put them in order of priority, ranging from the most important to the least important. and now get the limited resources that you have, which we are calling scarce resources, and then first attend to the needs which come priority on that scale of preference. And by that, clearing or taking care of need by need from order of importance, you'll be in position to make the right decision. And now, the moment you make the right decision or choice at this point, you are going to be faced by another fundamental economic problem, which is as a result of the choice that you've made. And what is that? It's simply the opportunity cost. When we look at opportunity cost, it's simply the second best alternative foregone when choice has been made. So in your scale of preference, the moment you choose to attend to the most important need, there is always the second one, which comes actually in the second position or next to the choice that you've taken. And that's what we are calling as the opportunity cost. So in that case, you'll have foregone that second best alternative because of the choice that you've taken. And that's what economics refers to as the opportunity cost or the trade-offs. So at this point, we are made to understand that economics as a subject is simply concerned with the three fundamental economic problems, which starts with scarcity, which gives rise to choice, and choice giving birth to opportunity cost. So it's not a subject of money or how to get rich and wealthy, just as the press and media, together with politicians, tend to depict it at times. Economics is simply a science that studies scarcity and the problems which scarcity gives rise. And among all the definitions of economics, it's only that of Reinhold Beans that is widely accepted. Why? Because he puts scarcity as the central focus of economics, as he defined the subject as a science that studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have got alternative uses. Now, note that word scarce means, which is the same as scarcity. And Reinhold Beans is actually resonating with what Eastwood is trying to highlight as the problem of scarcity of resource availability. And that was his contribution to the shape of economics today. So it also highlighted the dilemma of people choosing between work and leisure. And we need to understand that actually every single individual, they basically have 24 hours in a day. But for us to understand this on the case of labor, we need to partition these 24 hours into two major activities, that's work and leisure. Now, these are actually two competing priorities. And what makes them two competing priorities is that you cannot have them concurrently. For example, if an individual worker chooses to spend most of their time at work, that means they are going to earn more income through wages, which can obviously afford them more goods and services, which can give them maximum utility. However, they will be missing out on leisure. That means the time with families and friends will be very limited. So that will become the opportunity cost of working long hours. And similarly, if labor also chooses to spend most of their time in leisure, that means that actually they are going to have good moments with friends and families, but they will be earning less simply because they are working very less hours. So both activities have got what we call the opportunity cost, and they are equally needed by labor. So this is actually what Esoid is trying to mean to us, that there is always a dilemma of people choosing between work and leisure simply because these two activities are competing priorities and yet they are equally important to labor. So let us understand how this has helped to shape economics today. We shall look at labor economics, whereby we shall take a keen understanding of the labor supply curve. Now we know that this is an example of the abnormal supply curve, which obviously violates the law of supply. But our major interest will be in the backward bending of the labor supply curve, because that's what makes it an abnormal supply curve. Now, when we look at our graph, we check out on the x-axis, we have actually the hours of work that are supplied by labor, and on the y-axis, we actually have the wages in dollars. Now, we realize that in the initial stages, we can see that the labor supply curve actually has got a positive slope. As we see increase in wages on the y-axis, it induces workers to start producing or providing more hours of work, which are substituted from leisure actually. Now, we need to understand that at this point, there are actually three economic concepts which are highlighted by the positive slope of the labor supply curve in its initial state. And what are these? We can start by looking at the income effect, which is caused by the changes in wages. And now the income effect has got actually what we call a positive substitution effect on labor. For example, because of the changes in wages, which is positive, meaning that the wages are increasing, which encourages workers now to substitute most of their leisure time for work. As we can see, the hours of work have kept on increasing as the wages increase. So that means the income effect is responsible for the positive substitution effect of labor to give up many hours of leisure for work. So those are two concepts. And also we can understand the other third concept in terms of marginal utility. Now we know that marginal utility, the consumer rather is in equilibrium when marginal utility for the two products is actually the same, meaning that is one. However, when wages start to increase, that means the marginal utility of labor keeps on increasing, meaning that the marginal utility a worker that gets from spending more hours in leisure keeps on reducing. So at this point, because of the high marginal utility which a worker can gain in spending more hours at work through the wages, it forces the labor supply curve to take a positive slope in its initial stages. However, let us look at point P. At point P, we shall see the labor supply curve taking a different twist, whereby it will no longer have a positive slope and instead it will tend to have a negative slope, whereby increasing wages will actually stimulate the workers to have strong preference in leisure, whereby we can see that they will start dropping on the hours of work. Take for instance, when we see at this point that wages continue to increase past point P, we shall see that the labor supply curve actually will take a negative slope, which means that there is now an inverse relationship between wages and the hours of work supplied up to that final state. Now we need to understand which economic concepts are responsible to explain this twist in the labor supply curve. Economic student to actually understand the major economic factors responsible for the negative slope of the supply curve, meaning that starting from this point, why does the supply curve start bending backward from point P? As we can see, wages are continuing to increase, but it chooses to take a different twist, which we are referring to as the negative slope, which is the backward bending of the labor supply curve. So we shall look at the obvious explanation first of all, which is at high wages, as we can see, $45, workers are ready and willing to supply on 3 hours of work. Now we need to understand that when wages are extremely high, like at this point, workers no longer need to spend the same long hours as they used to when wages were very low. Take for instance at this time, when wages are at actually $45 per hour, people are spending only 3 hours at work. That means that comes something like $135 within the 3 hours they spend at work. Now you cannot compare that to even the 5 hours they used to spend at work when wages actually were low. Take for instance at this point, people were working 5 hours and they were earning just $25 per hour, and that total amount is something like $125. So 5 hours are equivalent to actually $125. How can you compare that to something like the $135 which they are earning when they are working only 3 hours? So that's the major explanation. But also we talk about the income effect. Previously, in the initial stage of the labor supply curve, the income effect had a positive substitution effect on labor by simply inducing it to supply more hours of work from leisure. Now, in this case, the income effect, which is realized by the changes in wages, which is positive, is not producing the desired substitution effect, in that the income effect is always expected for the employers, that when they increase the wages, they are expecting that workers are actually going to increase in the hours of work, call it productivity. But in this case, the income effect is generating what we call the negative substitution effect, whereby instead of motivating or inducing workers to supply more hours of work, it's rather discouraging them to supply more hours of work because they feel that's enough, that they are really working. They no longer need to work more long hours to earn their achieved target or their desired target. So that's another explanation. But we don't also forget to look at the concept of the diminishing marginal utility, where at this point, the additional increase in income, which is seen in the increase in wages, no longer gives the workers the desired utility. So in the initial stages, we simply saw something like when wages are increasing, we were seeing in the initial stage of the labor supply curve that even the hours of work were increasing, meaning that the additional utility gained from an extra income, which is increased in the form of wages, was always increasing, was really more. But in this case, additional income, which is gained from extra income of changes in wages, actually keeps on diminishing, meaning that it is giving this utility to the workers. That's why they can no longer be interested in supplying more hours of work, because every additional income which they are gaining from the increase in wages gives them this utility. So that explains partly why the labor supply curve also bends backward. And also don't forget that actually we look at labor also as a normal good, meaning that as the income of workers keeps on increasing, their demand for leisure will also start increasing simply because leisure is actually a normal good. So those are the major factors which can explain the backward bending of the labor supply curve. But don't forget our major concern, which is the dilemma of people choosing between work and leisure, as highlighted by history. So we can see it in here that from the initial stage, workers are struggling to really substitute some of the hours of leisure for work. Now that's first of all a dilemma, because before they were interested in only spending most of their time in leisure, but they started substituting it simply because of the increase in income. And when we reach at point P, now the reverse goes back to happen, whereby now they are substituting again the hours of work for leisure. So that's the dilemma Israel is trying to highlight to us. And we can also understand the dilemma of people choosing between work and leisure when we cross over at public finance by taking a quick look at the Rafa curve. Now, the Rafa curve is simply a curve which shows the relationship between the tax rates and the amount of revenue generated by a given country. And it was developed by a supply-side economist called Arthur Rafa. Now, the main reason why Arthur Rafa actually developed the Rafa curve, it was simply to show to government that at times, when you reduce on the tax rates, it can be in position to increase the revenue collection by a given country, or it can rather increase the income generated by a given country in tax revenue. So in here, we can also see from the graph, which is the Rafa curve of country A, we can be in position to see that on the x-axis, we have the tax rates in percentages. And on the y-axis, we have the tax revenue in $1 billion. So the Rafa curve also starts with slope, whereby there is a positive relationship between the tax rates and the tax revenue. As tax rates continue increasing in percentages, for example, at 40, the country is in position to generate $30 billion in taxes. So at this point, this positive slope will continue up to point Q. Now, point Q is what we refer to as the revenue optimization level of country, meaning that that's the highest amount of revenue this country can ever generate, beyond which the Rafa curve will start having a negative slope or it will diminish. Just as we can see, if this country chooses to increase on the tax rates from 60, which gives it its optimization level, the tax revenue will rather start diminishing or taking a negative slope. As we can see, when the country chooses to increase the tax rate to 70%, it will continue dropping. And just like that up to the final stage, which is 100. And in case the tax rates reach 100, that simply means that this country won't be in position to generate any revenue. However, our major interest is at this point and actually understanding why actually the Rafa curve has a negative slope from this point. One of the major explanations or reason why past the optimization level of country A, the revenue will actually start diminishing is simply because of people's preference for leisure. And what causes that is simply because of the high tax rates, whereby the people are really realizing that actually majority of their income in terms of percentage is being taken away in terms of revenue or in terms of taxes. So this doesn't encourage them to continue working long hours. So most of them will choose to substitute some of the hours of work for leisure. And that will partly explain the negative slope of the Rafa curve past the optimization level, which is point Q. And also, we don't also underestimate the role of other factors, such as international brain drain, and also people may be choosing to quit work completely. So those are some of the other factors responsible for the negative slope of the Rafa curve past the optimization level of country A. So basically, we really see that Israel's concept of actually the dilemma of people choosing between work and leisure is much alive and very relevant to us, because it can be highlighted in labor economics as we looked at the labor supply curve, and also it can be seen in public finance where we look at the Rafa curve. So that was the second contribution of Israel to the shape of economics today. And lastly, Israel also talked about the concept of competition, which leads to increase in production. And basically, when we talk about competition, it comes with two added advantages. And that's like competition improves on the quality of goods and services produced. And also, competition leads to the reduction in prices. So to mainly focus on prices, when prices of goods and services reduce, that encourages people to buy more goods and services. Why? Because of the increase in their purchasing power. And consequently, this will motivate producers also to produce more goods and services so as to meet the new existing demand of goods and services on the market. And that's what history is referring to as competition leading to increase in production. So those were history's major contributions to the world of economics that have shaped actually what we really study today in economics, because all these concepts are much alive and very useful to us in economics. So let us look at contributed the shape of economics, and this is none other than Xenophon. Now Xenophon was such an interesting philosopher, and in one of his most famous accomplishments, which is called Economicus, he talked about the economy and he gives the idea about how the household should be managed. Now according to Xenophon, he says that the proper management of a household or a state is essentially based on the effectiveness of the leader. So Xenophon is mainly concerned, is not concerned rather by the limited resources or how much resources that you have, but is rather concerned by how effective the leader is. Meaning that is the leader accountable, is the leader transparent, has he got some integrity, or does he also act decisively in any limited time possible so as to take economic advantage of any situation. Now, this is what Xenophon is trying to mean. He's trying to tell us that actually the proper management of a house depends on the art and the quality of leadership that the person in charge is having. And we shall take a quick example of one of the countries to probably exemplify his understanding of the art of leadership. And that's the case of the United Arab Emirates. The country got her independence in 1971, and actually it's located in the Middle East. It has got a population of around 9 million people. Now, we need to understand that from the initial stages of independence, this country had basically two major economic activities, and that was pearl hunting and also fishing. But when we talk about the United Arab Emirates now, within the past decade, especially after them discovering the oil, this is what they've been positioned to accomplish. Every time when we hear about the world's tallest building, of course, it's none other than the Burj Khalifa. This is located in the United Arab Emirates, that's in Dubai, which is their commercial city. And similarly, we talk about the biggest mall in the world. For people who love shopping so much, you very well know that that's actually the Dubai Mall. Now, the Dubai Mall is the biggest mall in such a sense that actually it has got outlets from all international producers, meaning that every international brand has got an outlet in this mall. And they have an outlet with the main aim of making sure that actually they recognize their presence on the international market. Why? Because Dubai is an international city. And also we shouldn't forget that it's also a place where you'll find the latest fashions and designs of any product that you can ever think about on this planet Earth. So that's what they've also been in position to achieve. But why are they achieving this? It's simply because of the leadership. And also, when we talk about people who are interested in hospitality and leisure, we talk about the most luxurious hotel in the world. And this is obviously the most expensive hotel in the world. And it's none other than the Burj Arab. It's the only 7-star hotel that we know about in the world. And hospitality, call it tourism. The country is also known for having the most biggest and luxurious man-made island in the world, and that's the Palm Jumeirah. Now, we need to note that this country we are using as our case study, UAE, has got still an endless list of accomplishments. But to get focused on how relevant is Xenophon's idea is simply using some of those accomplishments, but it's not about the resources that they have, because there are very many countries, especially the low-developed countries, which have got more resources than what UAE has. But it's simply because those low-developed countries actually have got issues with leadership. There is high levels of corruption. There is a lot of nepotism, tribalism, and favoritism. There is disrespect or no respect for human rights. So, and not until such leaders start acting in a manner that shows that they are accountable, have high degree of transparency or integrity, that's when such level of development can be registered. The relevancy of Xenophon's contribution to the shape of economics today, that actually proper management of a household or state is essentially based on the effectiveness of the leader. And that actually brings us to the second contribution of Xenophon, which is none other than the concept of division of labor, which Adam Smith later builds on in his book, The Wealth of Nations. So according to Xenophon, each person is engaged in tasks where he is more able and useful in order to increase efficiency. In other words, Xenophon is just trying to point to us the concept of specialization, which leads to creativity and innovation, since people are doing the same thing over and over. And also, still under specialization, we shouldn't forget that it's responsible for reduction in wastage in terms of cost and time. Now, we need to understand basically how this idea of Xenophon has tried to shape economics today. Now, everyone, I think, we very well know that Adam Smith is considered the father of modern economics. And now, we know that in one of his most famous accomplishments, which is actually called the Wealth of Nations, its depth and facility cannot be summarized without highlighting three major economic concepts. And that's division of labor, which obviously is Xenophon's original idea, and also its productivity, which is still linked to division of labor. And lastly, Adam Smith highlights the concept of free markets. But for purpose of understanding how Xenophon's idea contributed to the shape of economics today, we shall stick the first two concepts highlighted by Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations, and that's division of labor and productivity. Now, Adam Smith uses the analogy of a manufacturer of pins to simply usher us into his understanding of the concept of division of labor. The manufacturer of a pin chooses to undertake the whole production process of producing pins by himself, meaning that he handles all the 18 steps which are required in producing a pin. That particular manufacturer will be in position to produce just a handful of pins by the end of the week. However, if the same manufacturer chooses to take a different approach towards the production, and that's actually division of labor, he will be in position to break down all the 18 steps which are needed in the production of a pin into 10 stages, and thereby allocate single individuals to each stage. And as a result, this manufacturer will be in position to actually produce thousands of pins by the end of the week. So this means to us that actually division of labor is responsible for greater productivity, and that comes with three interlinked benefits. One, the reduction in wastage, which is in terms of cost and time. Since the whole production process is handled harmoniously, there is no need of transferring the production process from one stage to another. So the second interlinked benefit of actually division of labor is that of promotion of creativity and innovation. Since the workers are doing the same thing over and over, so that means they can actually come up with better ways of production, and consequently this will obviously promote innovation and creativity. And the other last interlinked benefit of division of labor is that of increased dexterity of workers. Now, when you look at this analogy of Adam Smith and you compare it with what Xenophon is trying to look at as according to division of labor, each person is engaged in tasks where he is more able and useful in order to increase efficiency. There is no big difference because this is specialization, and also Adam Smith is still highlighting the concept of specialization. So that's how Xenophon has contributed to the shape of economics with these two major economic concepts. As we can see, the concept of division of labor, which is actually used in Adam Smith's major economic books, which is The Wealth of Nations, and also the concept of the effectiveness of the leaders as a way of managing resources very well in a country or a household. So those were majorly Xenophon's contributions to the shape of economics. Let us take a quick look at our last Greek philosopher who contributed to the shape of economics today, and that's none other than Aristotle. Now, Aristotle was such a remarkable Greek philosopher, as he was a pupil of Plato and also a tutor of Alexander the Great in around 384 to 322 BC. He is arguably considered to be the greatest philosopher in ancient Greece, as he examined various phenomena in his most famous piece of works, labeled in titles such as Politics, Economics, Nicomachean Ethics, as well as Rhetoric to Alexander. Aristotle is also considered to be the father of problems which occupied him and still continue to meet scholars today after the passage of so many centuries. So let us take a quick look at his major contributions to the shape of economics today. Aristotle analyzed the economics according to ethical principles and examined it in both micro and macroeconomic terms, as we can see below. He based economics on needs and analyzed their nature. And when we talk about needs, these are simply human desires whose satisfaction is necessary to sustain life. Now, they include characteristics such as being unlimited, they are complementary, and also they have different degrees of urgency. He also proceeded by simply isolating economic goods by which economic needs are satisfied. And when we talk about economic goods, they are simply those types of goods whose supply is scarce, they require payment, and also they give satisfaction to the user. So they also have characteristics such as they are scarce in supply, they have opportunity cost, they give satisfaction to the user, they are marketable, and also they actually have a price. Now, he also went ahead to actually talk about the production and the factors which are involved in production. And when we talk about production, we are simply concerned with creating utility in a good or a service. And you cannot create utility in a good or a service without talking about factors such as land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurs. So those are the factors of production. Aristotle also highlighted the significance of the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. And when we talk about the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector, we are trying to highlight the stages or the process through which the production of goods and services go through. And starting with the primary sector, this is simply a sector which is mainly concerned with the extraction of raw materials from their original source. Now, in here we have activities such as mining, we have farming, we have lumbering, or call it agrobusiness or forestry, and also we have hunting, where we want to extract materials such as ivory, skin, and hides. Or when we move on to the secondary sector, this is simply a sector which is concerned with the transformation of raw materials got from the primary stage into semi or finished goods. And now in here, the major economic activities involved, we have things like construction, processing, and also manufacturing. And when we talk about also the tertiary sector, this is like a service sector. Other people call it aids to trade. Now, in the tertiary sector, this is a sector which is mainly concerned with services which facilitate the smooth running of trade. And basically, there are 5 services which facilitate the smooth running of trade. That's banking, insurance, advertisement, warehousing, and lastly, transport and communication. So that's what the tertiary sector is all about, those services which facilitate the smooth running of trade. Aristotle also mentioned about the distribution of labor, which is very imperative to us today. Aristotle also talked about the stages of development of the economy. And he also examined the phenomenon of economic development and prosperity, which is the basis of the most known thought of financial policy. We need also to know that in one of his most famous pieces of work, which was called Politics Book 4, he refers to financial matters, and in it, he devotes a number of pages trying to explain the tyrannical manners of administration. And according to him, he argued that a despot had to increase revenue in way of taxing of private property, imposing direct taxes, public works, together with other things. Therefore, it is worth noting that Aristotle influenced not only old times but the Middle Ages and the modern times through scholars like Adam Smith, John Keynes, Milton Friedman, and many others. To the end of the contributions of Greek philosophers to the shape of economics. As we've seen from his way, we talked about Xenophon, and lastly, we talked about the contributions of Aristotle to the shape of economics today. So one would pose a political question at this time, and why is it that the material world of ancient Greece did not develop as faster as the intellectual world? Well, the material world of ancient Greece did not develop as fast as the intellectual world simply because they were concerned mainly with things like morals and values, things like the good and bad, what is beautiful, the greater good of the entire community. And so because of that, they weren't so preoccupied with the things of how countries to become wealthy and rich. So that partly explains why they took most of their time understanding the behavior and the choices that people make and the reasons behind that, why things happen in the way they happen. So with that, it didn't give them enough time probably to focus on the material world of development, the wealth that we really see now. So that greatly explains why actually their material world did not develop as faster as their intellectual world. So let us move on our last segment of this presentation, and that's how economics has evolved over the years. So basically here we shall be interested in looking at the mercantilists. Now, what was the study of household management? The Greek philosophers was the study of wealth to the European mercantilists between the 16th and the 18th century. We need to understand that actually the mercantilists always refer to economics as economie politique for the French mercantilists and political economy for the British mercantilists as a subject that related to matters of public administration. So at this point, we are starting to understand how economics is evolving, starting from the Greek philosophers who looked at it as the study or the rules of household management, and now to the European mercantilists, this is the 16th century, they are looking at it as the study of wealth. So that's how economics is now starting to evolve. And someone would of course ask a question and wonder, why do we skip from actually the 5th century? Now we are actually on the 16th century. It's because the period between the 5th century and the 16th century, there was no economic achievement that was registered, simply because the whole world was at war. That's why we refer to that period mostly as the period of the Dark Age. So looking at that, we can go to the big question, which is, what is mercantilism? Now, when we talk about mercantilism, it was simply an economic theory that was developed by an English merchant called Thomas Mann, who lived around 1571 to 1671. Now, according to Thomas Mann, he asserted that a country would become wealthy only if they increased exports and reduced imports. And also a country had to acquire more stock of gold and precious metals. So let us pause for a minute and understand what mercantilism is. So when we talk about mercantilism, it was simply an economic theory that advocated for countries to use very heavy trade protectionist tools through their fiscal policies in order to increase exports and reduce on imports. And by that, countries will become wealthy. Now, we need to understand that actually mercantilism as a theory, it dominated the fiscal and the political ideas of Europe between the 1500 up to the 1800, as it encouraged the countries to use very heavy trade protection tools through their fiscal policy in order to increase exports and reduce imports. And through that, such countries actually become wealthy, grow, and evolve. Take an example of England, which was the epicenter of the British Empire. It imposed what we call the Sugar Act in 1764, which actually increased the duties on all foreign refined sugar and molasses that were imported in all our colonies. And this made actually the British sugar growers in West Indies operate as monopolies on the colonial market. And similarly was the Navigation Act of 1651, where Britain forbade all the foreign vessels from trading along the British coast. And it also required all the colonial exports which were imported in any European country to first go through Britain so as to be cleared before getting redistributed in any foreign country. And with such policies, obviously would make Britain have a very favorable balance of trade and finally become wealthy. So we move on. By this, a country will experience favorable balance of trade, like the way we've seen for the case of Britain, that through such policies, the Act, and it also imposed the Navigation Act, further it promoted what we call the favorable balance of trade. So mercantilism as a theory actually operated on one major assumption, and that was that the whole wealth of the world was actually fixed, which was obviously a total lie, because mercantilism, I think, it underestimated the role of technology, the discovery of idle resources, and also improvement in people's skills. Because of this wrong assumption, it was interpreted that if a country A increased her wealth, this would negatively affect the growth of country B and the rest because of the limited wealth left available. So consequently, this explains greatly the rise of European imperialism around the 16th century in North and South America, Africa, and Asia. Why? Because mercantilism had told the European powers, and they believed that actually it was only through increasing your geographical boundary through colonialism that you would be in position to acquire raw materials, cheap labor, and also have access to food and precious materials. Don't also forget that the same colonies would also act as source of market for all your finished goods and services, and through this you will be in position to increase on your exports, and that will actually promote growth and development together with prosperity of your country. So at the end of the 18th century, mercantilism had become unpopular because of two major reasons. And the first reason was actually the harsh rule and policies employed by the imperial masters in their territories. We need to understand that actually because of mercantilism, it is one of the contributing factors to the American War of Independence. And so when we talk about policies, we earlier on highlighted the effect of the Sugar Act of 1764 and also the Navigation Act of 1651, which were implemented by Britain. So this promoted actually rivalry among countries simply because of the restrictions among the trade members. So that greatly explains the fall of mercantilism. And the second contributing factors to the fall of mercantilism was the strong criticism from Adam Smith, who had emerged in the 17th century as a modern philosopher. So according to Adam Smith, you realize that he had a number of followers at that time as a scholar, and he argued that mercantilism as a system only reduced one, the specialization race among countries since it failed to maximize productivity, as countries employed very heavy trade protection tools, so this encouraged them almost to produce everything, which would promote a lot of inefficiency, underestimating the benefits of comparative advantage, which would actually lead to increased productivity. And secondly, mercantilism also reduced the overall trade due to rivalry among the countries, as the Act of 1764 and the Navigation Act of 1651, which were employed by Britain. This created a lot of tensions and rivalry among the trade members. With the combination of these two factors, therefore, countries will never grow and prosper. So Adam Smith actually introduced two concepts as a solution to the failures of mercantilism. And the first one was actually the concept of division of labor, essential to improve the productivity of countries through specialization. According to Adam Smith, he used the analogy of a manufacturer of pins, as he asserted that in case a manufacturer of pins chooses to undertake the production process by himself and handle all the 18 steps required in producing a pin by himself, he would end up producing just a handful of pins by the end of the week. However, if the same manufacturer chooses to take a different approach towards production and thus using what he called division of labor, where he would be in position to break down the 18 steps which are required in producing a pin into 10 stages and allocate a single individual to each stage, by the end of the week, this manufacturer will produce thousands of pins. So according to Adam Smith, he explained it clearly that actually division of labor is responsible for greater productivity, which comes along with three interlinked benefits, and thus reduction in wastage in terms of cost and time, as the whole production process is handled harmoniously. And secondly, division of labor would actually promote what we call creativity and innovation, since people or workers are doing the same thing over and over, so they will come up with different means of producing, which will promote creativity and innovation. And the other third linked benefit of specialization or division of labor is increased dexterity of the workers, and consequently this will promote increased productivity. And secondly, Adam Smith also raised the concept of free markets, which promote the mutual benefits of traders in all countries. It's not by the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but out of their own regard for self-interest. That's one of the most famous quotes made by Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations, as he ushers us into his understanding of how a free market operates. So by the end of the day, an economy comes down to two economic actors, that's the seller and the buyer. And in case the government interferes in a market, it would actually promote what we call the market failure. So according to Adam Smith, a free market is a place where a seller looks at it as an opportunity for them to trade their self-interest. However, he encourages them to bear in mind the interest of the buyer. Adam Smith uses the analogy of a baker in order for us to understand this concept of the free market. So according to Adam Smith, he asserts that in case a baker of scones experiences an increase in demand for his product, he will obviously increase on the amount of output, but this will consequently attract other bakers into the market. And when other bakers are attracted into the market, the wheat growers will equally be motivated to also grow more wheat on the market so as to meet the new existing demand for wheat by the bakers. This will consequently slash the cost of production on the side of the bakers. And at the end of the day, the consumers will be in position to pay for the least possible price for the scones simply because of the reduction in the cost of production on the side of the baker. So by this, the forces of demand and supply will have created a balance in the market. And in this, every person in the economy will live happily. This is what Adam Smith refers to as being led by the invisible hand, which satisfies both large companies and smaller companies like those of the baker. So according to Adam Smith, there are basically three major economic principles responsible for driving an economy to becoming prosperous, wealthy, or develop and grow. And that's actually division of labor, productivity, and the free markets. So we need to understand that at this point, that better understanding of trade through Adam Smith's concepts, which is division of labor, productivity, and free markets, actually paved the way for capitalism, which replaced mercantilism. So at this point, we are already seeing the introduction of capitalism in the whole world. It was simply because of those ideas of Adam Smith which paved the way for capitalism. And no wonder Adam Smith is referred to as the father of modern economics, which is capitalism basically. So that's what we can talk about as how economics has evolved over the years, with those contributions of Adam Smith together with the harsh rules and policies which colonial powers used to practice at a time they gave rise to the collapse of mercantilism. And so we see how economics is now evolving from mercantilism to now modern economics, which is capitalism, through the contributions of Adam Smith. So let us look at a summary of how economics has evolved over the years by definition, and we shall be interested in how economics has traveled by definition based on purpose. So this is an entire summary of what we've really looked at, starting with actually the Greek philosophers who perceived economics as the study of rules of household management. That was between 700 BC after the 5th century, and then we moved on to the European mercantilists who looked at economics as the study of wealth, and that was between the 16th century to the late 18th century. And lastly, we talk about the modern economists who were spearheaded by Adam Smith, with his critical views against the rise of mercantilism as he raised concepts such as division of labor, productivity, and the free markets, which were typical solutions to the failures of mercantilism, as it shaped the ideas of trade for capitalism to have a clear path which actually replaced mercantilism. So we shall look at the modern economists who was spearheaded by Adam Smith, Alfred Marshall, and then later Reynolds. Remember? So this happened actually starting from the 18th century up to date. And with that, we have an important quote here which we need to understand, that economics as a subject has traveled a long way, meaning that the Greek and Smithian definition no longer serve our purpose today. And for this reason, we need to ask ourselves an important question: why do economic definitions keep on evolving and are not static? The reason is because of over time, the focus of attention of the subject keeps on changing depending on current needs, interests, and appeals, which in effect forces existing definitions to evolve by current scholars as to meet the needs and purpose of the present-day scholars or society. Now, we really saw from the ancient Greek civilization where scholars, the great work of scholars like Hesiod, Xenophon, and Aristotle contributed the shape of economics today. However, when we come to the European mercantilists, they also had their own understanding. Why? Because at that time of mercantilism, the needs, interests, and appeals to that generation, it was totally different. So that's why they perceived economics as the study of wealth, and mercantilism was the economic view that actually resonated with their understanding of economics. Not until when we see the rise of Adam Smith from the late 18th century, challenging the views of mercantilism, claiming that actually mercantilism never promoted specialization, and also it increased the rivalry among trade members. So he came up with those three major concepts to counteract the failures of mercantilism. That was division of labor, productivity, and free markets, which we already talked about. And the reason why people actually followed his ideas is because it's what actually mattered to the needs, interests, and appeals of the 18th century. So no wonder mercantilism had to collapse and then paving way for capitalism. So we also have food for thought. Is there any strong case to re-evaluate and change what economics students learn in their introductory courses? That's something you need just to think about. So this actually brings us to the end of our presentation. But there is just one thing, and that's the evaluation bit. You know, as a student and even as a teacher, I want really to see whether my students have understood what I've taught them or not. And even for you, it's imperative that you get to know how much you've been in position to cover in a particular presentation or lesson. So you also have got a couple of objective questions for you, and the instructions are clear. You read the question, pause it, it has got answers which are in form of objectives, of course. So you go through the answers, and once you get the right answer, write it down, play the video again, and compare your answer with ours. I think by the end of the entire session of the questions, evaluate yourself how much you've been in position to understand these entire presentations. And because you have the video, you can always go through it over and over until you understand. So there's nothing like judging you or anything, but rather seeing how much you've been in position to cover. Good luck. So we shall move on to our first question, which is none other than, who was the first philosopher to highlight the concept of scarcity? We already looked at this when we were looking actually at the Greek philosophers, and of course our answer is D. That was Hesiod. Now we have our second question, which is blank was the study of household management to the blank, while blank was the study of wealth to the blank. So still I got you covered, the answers are right here. So is it A, is it B, is it C? You realize that all those answers, either A, they have got like 4 different answers in it, meaning that if you fill the 4 blanks. So you just choose what is important for you and what you think actually fills in those blanks appropriately as according to what we've covered. So according to this, the answer is actually C. Well, economics was simply the study of household management to the Greek philosophers, while political economy was the study of wealth to the European mercantilists. And we go on question 3, which says, which Greek philosopher advanced the concept of division of labor, which Adam Smith uses later in his book, The Wealth of Nation. Now, we talked about this as this was actually the second Greek philosopher we talked about, and this was none other than Xenophon. And last but not least, why did mercantilism collapse by the end of the 18th century? So we already looked at these major reasons. And of course, the right answer is obviously E, which talks about the harsh rules and policies used by the imperial masters, and also the rise of Adam Smith as a modern scholar in the 18th century, whose views were very critical to the rise of mercantilism, as he asserted that mercantilism reduced the specialization rates among countries, and also it promoted rivalry among trade members. So the last question is, why did Adam Smith criticize mercantilism as an economic field developed by Thomas Mann in the 15th century? Of course, if you followed very well when I was answering question 4, you obviously can get these ones right. So the right answer also is actually A and C only, which asserts that mercantilism reduced specialization rates that limited productivity of countries. And lastly, Adam Smith also said that mercantilism as a theory reduced the overall trade benefits among trade member countries due to rivalry. And finally, we come to the end of our presentation. And all I want to say is that thank you for following. I hope you gained something. Let's catch up in our next video presentation, where we shall be talking about the different definitions of economics according to proponents, highlighting the limitations of each. And until then, you need to enjoy the rest of your time, and please stay safe. Don't also forget to subscribe, follow, and like us on all our socials. I can't wait to see you again. Yalla bye.